Now, the second thing is more insidious. You don't deal with that on a day-to-day basis, though as you start to shift more and more into homeschooling, you will. What you deal with on a day-to-day basis is that the mechanism of education has been stolen. And so a communist by the name of Paulo Freire, who was in Brazil, that's why his name is hard to spell, studied what Mao Zedong did in his revolutionary high schools and his revolutionary colleges, and he said, this is a great model of education. He says this in a footnote in his most important book, which is called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, published in 1970. He says that he bases his model largely off of what he saw working in China. He also adapted it from post-colonial stuff and some other things, and he sort of made it up. But his whole goal was, we're not going to use the academic lessons or the reading lessons to learn to read words or do math or whatever else. We're going to learn to read society. We're going to learn to read politics. A true education, he said, isn't about academic exercises. It's about becoming politically awake. And so what they did is what he did was he devised a method of education where the academic lesson becomes a mediator, in his words, to true political knowledge. The teacher ceases to be a teacher and becomes a facilitator into the right understanding of political circumstances in the real lives of children. Now I give that description. The teacher is a facilitator into the contents, the real political interpretation of the experiences in the lives of children. You might think, wow, that sounds something like, that the education has to be culturally relevant, which is the word that it got repackaged into in the 90s. So this culturally relevant teaching, when you went to the school and said, I don't want them teaching CRT, and they said, well, we don't teach critical race theory, we teach a different CRT, culturally relevant teaching, it's good for the kids. It has to be culturally relevant to get them engaged. It's just the same program repackaged. Culturally relevant teaching is the Marxist theft of education repackaged out of its original name, which is Freirean critical pedagogy. And the goal with that is to use the academic lesson as an excuse to have political conversations that you give the right answers to the kids so they will believe the right political things about their circumstances in life. And it goes like this. This is a real example from a real teacher training done in, again, yet another liberal bastion in the country, Indiana, good farm country, real teacher training, real example, second grade math lesson. The teacher who gave me this example told me that by the end of the training, they had learned to be able to do this, not just to this one special example, but to anything. Any academic lesson, they could transform it into a political lesson. And here's how it goes. Get ready for a math quiz. It's second grade level, so we'll see if you were smarter than a second grader. I did this in a talk somewhere, South Carolina, I think, and I had a second grader in the class, in the room, in the audience. And as soon as I read the question, by the way, he shouted out the answer. So the pressure is on. So Johnny is riding in the car with his mom and dad on the way to the amusement park. The amusement park is 50 miles away. They've already driven 30 miles. How much further is there to go? And if you're embarrassed and don't know the answer, that's okay. I'm not actually going to make you raise your hand. So what the teachers are taught to do, now imagine first you're the parent, right? So you're like, something funny is going on at school, I want to see your homework. So they pull out their homework and like, because they're 7, and they hand it to you finally, and you look at it, and that's what's on the paper, and you're like, okay, go do your homework. Who cares, right? Johnny's riding in the car with his mom and dad on the way to the amusement park. Okay, great. 50, 30, there's some other number involved. It's 20. Okay, great. Don't tell him the answer. He's got to figure it out himself. The teachers are not taught to do what you're supposed to do in a math lesson. Now, if you haven't taught math before, the point of the mathematics word problem lesson is here's words, make a mathematical expression, answer the mathematical question, give the answer back in words. So you have a paragraph, the kid's supposed to write down 50 minus 30 equals 20, and then say they have 20 miles left to go. That's what they're supposed to be teaching the second grader to do. But they're taught in teacher training, no, we have to get the kids engaged. They'll think these examples are boring. Some kid's going to raise their hand and say, why do we have to learn math? This is boring. And so you have to get them engaged or they won't want to learn and their learning outcomes will be bad. That's why nobody's learning math. The kids aren't engaged. So we've got to make it relevant to them. So, hey, class, you ask them, who's ever been to an amusement park? Seems like an innocuous question. You want to make the second graders have fun, right? So this is what Paulo Freire called a generative theme. He had a technical term for it. Generative because it generates a political discussion. So you think, what? Amusement park? Who's ever been to an amusement park? Well, guess what? There's 7. So some kids have and some kids haven't, for sure, right? So some kids raise their hand and some kids don't, and now you have difference. And you can wedge into that difference. You can make that difference a point of conversation. Okay, so some of you have kids, some of you haven't. What are some reasons why some of you would have got to go, but some of you have not? Why is it that some kids haven't been to an amusement park? And they are taught in the teacher training to let the kids say whatever kids say the darndest things that they're going to say until one of them says something like, some people can't afford it. At which point you say, that's right. Some people can't afford to go. It's expensive to go to an amusement park, isn't it, guys? It's really expensive. How could we make sure everybody can afford to go to an amusement park? And now you're permitted for the next 40 minutes to talk about socialism. Make the rich people pay for it. Make it free. Make the government pay. With 7-year-olds. If there's a racial disparity in the kids that raise their hands, more white kids raise their hands, fewer black kids raise their hands, something like this, immediately you can seize upon this. Whoa, why is it that so many of the white kids got to go, but the black kids haven't got to go? And you can wedge in a critical race theory lesson. Maybe you push in a different direction. Maybe the first kid that says something politically useful is, my mom says we're not old enough. Now you get to have a conversation about parental authority. Should parents really be allowed to make decisions? That's not fair. So now the parents are the enemy. And we go back to Antonio Gramsci for a second, who said that we have to figure out how to drive a wedge into the cultural institution of family. And now you're building one. Some parents aren't fair. Should parents be allowed to decide things like that? That's not fair to your classmates. Your friends didn't even get to go. That's not fair. And the kids who don't get to go, yeah, that's not fair. When do I get to go? And now they're building out a wedge between the kid and the parent. And all they have to say is, maybe we can put together. They don't have to promise anything. Maybe we can put together a field trip and I'll go to the amusement park together. Maybe the school can make sure you guys all go. Would you want the school to take you? Instead of having class, we could go to the amusement park? Yeah, you know, right? This is called a generative theme in Freirean education. And that's why when you look at the homework, you see nothing. And they say, we're not teaching critical race theory. Here, look at the curriculum you had to get a Freedom of Information Act request to look at that they didn't want to give you and you charged you money and tried to sue you for requesting. And you get this thing and you're like, there's nothing here. And then that's what they're actually doing with it. They're being taught to teach that way. And you may have guessed that mom and dad is a generative theme. Do all families, kids, you know, Johnny's riding with his mom and dad to the amusement park. Do all families have a mom and dad? I only have a mom at home. Now you're having a conversation about feminism. My friend has 2 moms. We know where that one goes. The Gay Straight Alliance Club or Gender Sexuality Alliance Club meets after school. Anybody feel like maybe they're born in the wrong body? Let's go. No kidding. Those conversations come up in that way. The word problem becomes a mediator to a political conversation. There's one more generative theme. One sentence, by the way. One sentence at a 2nd grade level, 3 generative themes. Do you know what the 3rd one was? We've got amusement park, we've got mom and dad, car. Is it really good for the environment for us to drive in a car to go have fun? And they can have a conversation about sustainable development goal, whichever number it is, to make sure that the good global citizen kids care about pollution. We're polluting the air with all of our cars. Wouldn't it be better if we didn't have cars? I'm not kidding. These are the conversations in the state of Indiana that were being taught to teachers in professional development training about how to be more engaging with the students for 2nd grade math class. And those are the dialogues that take place in the classroom. That is the mechanism by which they stole how education is done. And unless you know that that's what they're doing, you have no chance of being able to show up and say, this has to stop. You have no chance to be able to articulate what's going on and how it's done. Now, why do they care? I mean, obviously that works. It's very insidious. It should make you kind of mad. Why did they do this kind of on a grand scheme plan? It's because what they realized was that Western civilization suffers from what they called the problem of reproduction. Western civilization reproduces itself from one generation to the next, and the school